Good morning. Let's open in a word of prayer. Father, thank you so much for your word. Thank you so much for your guidance. We pray that you will give us wisdom and understanding this week so that we can understand the times in which we live and how they relate to what certainly appears to be the soon return of the Lord Jesus Christ to set up his kingdom. In Jesus' name, amen. So, escalating convergence. And if you notice, I've sort of changed the date a little bit to sort of reflect maybe what's going on here in the world today. Somebody sent me that, and I thought it was kind of cute that the zeros have been replaced with lifesavers. We talk each week, again, about convergence of events, and it seems that with regard to some of the events that happened over the last couple of weeks, some of this will be sort of a continuation of last week and the assassination of Soleimani, probably the second most powerful person in the nation of Iran, ancient Persia, which is a major player in end times Bible prophecy. Everything seems to be converging. It is kind of a disrupted world. Let me just look at one thing, which I think is sort of, I hate to say this, but a preview of coming attractions, possibly. We know that there's a period of time coming on the earth, the 70th week of Daniel, in which some pretty amazing things will happen. Some of those things are, signs of the heavens. There are things happening on the earth, things that a lot of times people say, well, this is unprecedented. That is a term that's used quite a bit right now. There are things, for example, that I'm not even going to talk about today. I know there's like a measles epidemic in the Congo. I think over 6,000 people have died from that. There are these, and I keep reading these stories about viruses. There's been sort of a plague in China, and they haven't really managed it that well. And some of those viruses are mutating and spreading. And it's a world in which things can spread very rapidly. We get on airplanes, we fly places, and it's very easy for something to get spread from one place to another. You might remember a few years ago I played the video. It was a made-up video of how a disease would spread worldwide from one person. And you could select like your zip code, and you can see how that thing would spread worldwide. And it really took it something like, I think it was like 26 days to where it had spread pretty much all over the world. And this is the type of world that we live in. But some of the things that you see week to week are sort of apocalyptic. This is a picture of a hillside in Australia that somebody took this week. And it looks like lava, but it's just brush fires. In one of the Arab newspapers that I read, I thought this was a great editorial cartoon. Now, I've heard numbers in Australia of 500 million, 1 billion, couple 100 million animals that have been killed in these brush fires that have taken place. Someone took a satellite high-resolution map of Australia and did a time lapse. So this will go from early November, it's about 30 seconds. You can watch how the fires develop. This is from early November to about January the 7th. It's a fascinating thing as you watch how these fires have kind of spread around Australia. So you see here we're at November 18th, 20th. You can see the date changing in the upper corner, left-hand corner. And it's very, there were major fires in the region of Victoria, which is in southeast Australia. There was a big fires back in 2009. I think they called the big day, they called it Black Saturday. You can actually see some videos about this. But these videos just go on. Here's what somebody did was they took a composite of all of those images there. And this is what the fire map of Australia looks like. Now, you need to understand that a lot of Australia is open, empty desert space. It's not going to burn anyway. So the last I've seen is that the numbers are 20-some thousand square miles, over half the size of the state of Ohio, have burned. There were even fires this week, which they were afraid it was either in Victoria, which is in the lower right-hand corner, New South Wales, which is just to the north, that these brush fires were going to merge into a major fire. So this is something of great concern. I think it is, unfortunately, I think it's possibly a preview of coming attractions. And the only thing, when you see even secular people describing these things that are happening like this, like happened in California a year or so ago, they use the term apocalyptic because it is apocalyptic. And we know that these things are coming. We know that this is the way the Lord said that the world would be prior to his return. And I admit it's not comfortable to watch when you see people suffering. But that country is the size of the United States, essentially. So imagine, just take those fires and put them on the United States. Now, Australia only has, I think, 25 or 30 million people, so they don't have the number of people, but a lot of people's lives have been totally disrupted. Now, I'm going to read some verses. We're going to talk a lot today about Persia, Iran, Middle East, and that type of thing. So let me just look at some verses that we're going to talk. And I want to remind you that, and you might go back to my update. It would be the Sunday after August the 29th, where I talked a lot about Soleimani. And I talked about, there was a great article at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs titled "The Iranian Conquest of Syria." And they made some very important points in there. For example, one of the points they made was, Iran threw into, and whenever you hear Iran, just sort of think Persia. Iran threw into the battle for Syria its foreign legions, Lebanese Hezbollah, Iraqi, Afghani, and Pakistani formations, together with a corps of Iranian officers belonging to the Al-Quds division under the command of Qassem Soleimani. Now, Qassem Soleimani was the head of the Al-Quds force. Al-Quds is the name for Jerusalem. And that was an indication of what that force wanted to accomplish. They want to take back Jerusalem for Islam. And they don't just want the Temple Mount, they want the whole thing. And that's what drove Soleimani. You need to also understand that, and I think this is something that people in our foreign policy establishment and presidents have had a difficult time grasping, but the Iranian rulers, the mullahs, and the people like Soleimani are Shia Islamist radicals that believe in what they call Twelver Shiism. They believe that there will be a 12th Mahdi, Islamic leader that will come. He will rise. He will appear out of a well in a mosque in Iraq. He'll go to Jerusalem, eventually conquer or take over the Middle East. He will work with returning Jesus Christ as his sort of assistant. And they believe this. Now, the thing that's different is that drives their eschatology is that Christians believe that, yes, we have an eschatology and we believe that these things will come to pass. But most Christians believe that they will pass in God's time. God will work this out when it's the perfect time for him to work it out. We know what's coming, but knowing what's coming is not the same thing as causing it. I often see people on some of these liberal so-called Christian sites, and they'll say, oh, these evangelical Christians, they're causing they're trying to bring about Armageddon. Now, until the Trump administration, my comment to a lot of them was, wouldn't there have been conservative, evangelical, premillennial, believers in positions of power in Washington, D.C.? And a lot of times they'll bring up, well, Secretary of the Secretary of the Interior, James Watt. He was one of those believers. But that's like what, 30 some years ago. And he wasn't even in office all that long. The bigger problem is that the people on the left, they have an eschatology too. They talk about apocalypse. They talk about we only have 10 or 12 or 20 years, or whatever the number is. It keeps changing. By the way, I should put them up. You can go back and find New York Times articles. There's a great, New York Times does have whether you agree with their politics or not, you should not agree with their politics, but they are sort of an important newspaper of record. And when they stick to journalism, they actually do a pretty good job. There's a good report this morning in the New York Times about what's happened over the last 7 days. And it's pretty detailed and it's pretty good. But you can go back in 1922, 1923, and you can find articles that talk about this horrible global climate crisis problem that's going to take down the world in about 10 years. This is on the front page of the New York Times 100 years ago. So just understand, we all have an eschatology. We all have a religion, but I'm more concerned about the people that are actually in charge. These leftists, these climate change people. I saw yesterday, an article that California now wants to ban gas-powered lawn tools, garden tools. They want, I don't know, do they understand that fossil fuels have actually made the world pretty much a much better place, more convenient place to live? And do they want to replace all the cars with horses? And the mess of you guys go to Amish country, you see the things on the road up that makes the road slippery on a rainy day. That's just from 1 or 2 horses. Imagine if everybody had horses. And they want us to live, it's insanity. So if you want to go back to Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, look at this article, which I think will tell you a lot about Soleimani, the Iranian conquest of Syria. And this is something that's happened. Iran saw an opportunity in Syria after the Syrian civil war started that they could create a hegemonic power all the way from Iran to the Mediterranean. And they are working on that. They've been working in Iraq, which they had a massive war. Remember the big war that they had with Iraq back in the 1980s? Over 1 million people on both sides, combined, 1 million people on both sides died in that war between 1981 and 1989. But now Iran is they've tried to make themselves through proxies powerful and in control of all across the Middle East. Now, this week, their enterprise has not gone that well. But when you talk to the Iranians, they will tell you, we have a 20-year plan and a 50-year plan and a 100-year plan. They know, for example, Ayatollah Khamenei knows that whatever he wants to accomplish with regard to the Middle East is probably not going to happen in his lifetime, but he doesn't care because he's part of a religious group that looks at things long term. Here in America, we're worried about, the Iowa caucus in a few weeks, or the elections this year in 2020. And immediately our attention will then turn to the presidential election in 2024. And the midterms, it's just a constant, but it's always short term and they're long term. But in Daniel talks in a couple of places about, in Daniel 8 and Daniel 10, about Persia. So here we see Daniel chapter 8, verse 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared unto me. This is Daniel writing. Even unto me, Daniel, after that which appeared unto me at the first. And I saw in a vision, and it came to pass when I saw that I was at Shushan in the palace, which is in the province of Elam. That's part of Persia. That's probably down near, today it would be down along the Persian Gulf near the Bushehr nuclear power plant. I was at Shushan in the palace, which was in the province of Elam, and I saw in a vision, and it was by the river Ulai. Then I lifted up mine eyes and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram which had two horns, and the two horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up at the last. And as you read through this, you will see that this ram came and took over the goat. The goat represents, so therefore the he-goat waxed very great, verse 8, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and for it came up four notable ones toward the four winds of heaven. Now the traditional interpretation of this passage is that this was fulfilled when Alexander the Great came from the east and went across the Middle East in a very rapid, he went to Jerusalem, and he was told about the temple there. He eventually conquered all the way to the Indus River in India, modern-day India, Pakistan region. It was incredible what he did in a very short period of time. He died, and his kingdom was broken up into many parts. Now, the traditional teaching is, well, his kingdom was broken up into four parts, and so Daniel 8's been fulfilled. But when you really look and dig into the history, it doesn't really appear to match up to what we've been talking about. And I've taught this myself when I've taught about Bible prophecy and Daniel 8 in particular, that yes, there were four generals that came up, Seleucid, Ptolemy, and a couple others, and eventually became Ptolemy, which was in Egypt, Seleucid, which was in the area of Syria, and this was the fulfillment of that potential prophecy. But there is, I think, a growing body of people in eschatology circles, and I don't think any of them are particularly dogmatic, that think that this prophecy in Daniel chapter 8 may actually still be future. And it involves essentially what it would involve if you put it on the map today. It would involve a coming conflict between Turkey and Iran, Turkey and Persia. And it does say in Daniel chapter 8 a couple places that this was a prophecy for the time of the end. So again, I'm not dogmatic on it, but this is a prophecy I believe, if it is still applicable, applies to Persia today. Now in Daniel chapter 10, Daniel also got another vision instruction about Persia and how Persia, some of the things that are going on behind the scenes. So it says this, in the third year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a thing was revealed unto Daniel, whose name was called Belshazzar, and the thing was true, but the time appointed was long, and he understood the thing, and he had understanding of the vision. In those days, I, Daniel, was mourning 3 full weeks. I ate no pleasant bread, neither came flesh nor wine in my mouth, neither did I anoint myself at all, till 3 whole weeks were fulfilled. And the 24th day of the first month, as I was by the side of the great river, which is Hiddekel, then I lifted up my eyes and looked, and behold, a certain man clothed in linen, whose loins were girded with fine gold of Uphaz. His body was like the beryl, and his face as the appearance of lightning, and his eyes as lamps of fire, and his arms and feet like in color to polished brass, and the voice of his words was like the voice of a multitude. And I, Daniel, alone saw the vision, for the men that were with me saw not the vision, but a great quaking fell upon them, so that they fled to hide themselves. This was sort of a terrifying thing that happened. Therefore I was left alone and saw this great vision, and there remained no more strength in me, for my comeliness was turned in meat into corruption, and I retained no strength. Yet I heard the voice of his words. When I heard the voice of his words, then I was in a deep sleep, and my face toward the ground. And behold, a hand touched me, and which set me upon my knees, upon the palms of my hands. And he said to me, O Daniel, a man greatly beloved, understand the words that I speak unto thee, and stand upright. For unto thee I am now sent. And when he had spoken this word unto me, I stood trembling. Then he said unto me, Fear not, Daniel, for the first day that thou dost set thy heart to understand and to chasten thyself before God, thy words were heard, and I am come for thy words. So for 3 weeks, Daniel's been praying, and this person says, look, when you started praying, I started out to come see you. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. But lo, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, and I remained there with the kings of Persia. For I am now come to make thee understand what shall befall thy people in the latter days. For yet the vision is for many days. So this is something that's going to happen in the future relative to Daniel. And I believe in the future relative to us. Now and when he had spoken such words unto me, I set my face towards the ground, and I became dumb. And behold, one like the similitude of the sons of men touched my lips. Then I opened my mouth and spake, and said unto him that stood before me, O my Lord, by the vision my sorrows are turned upon me, and I have retained no strength. For how can the servant of this my Lord talk with this my Lord? For as for me, straightway there remained no strength in me, neither is any breath left in me. Then he came again and touched me like the appearance of a man, and he strengthened me, and he said, O man greatly beloved, fear not. Peace be unto thee, be strong, yea, be strong. And when he had spoken to me, I was strengthened, and he said, Let my Lord speak, for thou hast strengthened me. Then said he, Knowest thou wherefore I come unto thee? And now I will return to fight with the prince of Persia. And when I am gone forth, lo, the prince of Grecia shall come. But I will show thee that which is noted in the scripture of truth, and there is none that holdeth with me in these things, but Michael your prince. So what you see here is that there is a prince, a spiritual power behind Iran. We very often talk about significant things that we think have helped advance the prophetic time clock. We talk about the regathering, the reconstitution of a Jewish state of Israel in 1948. Not a perfect state and that sort of thing. Certainly they've not turned to the Lord. But I think the prophecies, if you look at Ezekiel 36 and elsewhere, the initial gathering of the people back in the land will be in unbelief. And there will be a time that they will prosper in the land. I think it's clear in Ezekiel chapter 36 and 37. But eventually, they will turn to the Lord. In Ezekiel 36, it says, I will bring you back, then I will give you a new heart. So my question is, how do they get a new heart back in the land if they're not back in the land? We also see the significance of the Bible prophecies of 1967 and the recapture of the city of Jerusalem by Israel. A very significant time. I remember when my father saw that happen. He talked about it in his Wednesday night and Sunday night Bible studies for weeks. I have the notes. Yes, he watched the news just like I do and that type of thing. So we know that these things are coming, but the key thing and the takeaway from Daniel is Persia is very important, and there's a spiritual battle going on in the heavenlies behind all of this thing. And so while we always look at Israel and say, oh, well, look what's happened with Israel, and that's this work in process, we have to acknowledge that, and Israel's not invincible. We know that there's trouble ahead. There's a period of time coming, the time of Jacob's trouble. And it'll be a time, Jeremiah says it, Jesus says it'll be a time like never before. So we know what happened when Rome took over Jerusalem in 70 AD. And we know what happened after the Bar Kokhba rebellion around 132 AD. The time that's coming is worse than any of those times. And those times were really bad. So, but we know that this is coming and there's a spiritual battle behind this. But one of the things we forget is what happened in 1979, a little over 40 years ago. And that is when Iran had a revolution. The Islamic Republic came into being. And since then, there is no mistake in my mind, or no question in my mind, that the United States has been at war with Iran. Now, this week, with the killing of Soleimani, which we talked about last Sunday, there's been a number of developments that have happened. This is from the Institute for Study of War, and it's a timeline about the things that have happened over the past, actually since about summer of last year. The little things going on between the United States and Iran and Israel and Iran, And it culminated with the president's decision to take out Qasem Soleimani, the head of the Al-Quds force of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. And there's been all kinds of opinions and analyses. I'm going to sort of go through these. I'm going to jump around a bit as opinions. Mideast, you see the headlines in all the paper. Mideast tensions rise after strike. A big article in the Wall Street Journal. Commander Soleimani steered Iran's foreign forays. He was traveling all over the place, despite the fact that the UN had put in place a travel ban on this guy many years ago. And he, I think it was in 2015, he went to Russia. He was in Syria. He was in Iraq. And he was causing trouble everywhere he went because he had a plan, and he was relentless about it. And he was a self-promoter. There would be a battle or something, and then Soleimani would show up and take a selfie, and he was a big self-promoter. But a lot of people died because of this. I mean, regardless of which number you adopt, 500,000 or 1 million people dead in Syria, in large part because of Soleimani and what he was trying to accomplish. Now, there was this very strange time where we were sort of allied with Soleimani as he was trying to take out the Sunni-based Islamic State. That didn't last very long. So there was all these people. Are we going to war? Is this a war? Is this going to start World War III? Trump's out of control. All of this stuff that we see. The Europeans have come in. Oh, we got to get back to the JCPOA that President Obama and John Kerry negotiated and signed back in 2015. That would solve everything. And there were, everywhere you looked, there were big articles about it. This is from the Guardian Weekly, the killing of Qasem Soleimani. There were analyses, I think this is from the Wall Street Journal, talking about, Trump had a team and they made a decision to take out Soleimani. And it was I think it maybe threw the Iranians for a bit of a loop because, they took out the Iranian or the Saudi Arabian oil refinery back in mid-September, and they had taken out a $230 million American drone back in July. And there had been essentially no response from the United States other than to ramp up sanctions. So Trump decided this time to take out Soleimani. And of course, when Trump, it's kind of interesting to watch him, or watch the reaction to him. So back in July and September, when he didn't respond to the drone being taken down by Iran, or the Iranian attack on the Saudi Arabian oil refinery, the largest one in the world, that for a time cut Saudi Arabia's oil production in half, with a very precise strike of cruise missiles and drones, Trump didn't do anything other than ramp up some sanctions. And we said, oh, Trump's not doing enough. Boy, you just can't count on him. Okay, now he does this, and it's like Trump's driving us into World War III. And what you see is this irrational gut reaction, everything that Trump does, that it's the opposite that's true. Now, what happened was there were these massive, they were dragging Soleimani's body all over Iraq and Iran this week in funerals. And this was the one in Tehran. This is Ayatollah Khamenei, leadership of Iran. And what you see when you see these pictures, you see the pictures of streets and bridges in Tehran. Same thing in Baghdad. Everywhere he goes, there are these massive crowds. And everybody says, well, look what Trump did. He united the Iranian people. Now, listen, I think a lot of that is fake. And they drug these coffins, and they're dragging these things all over the place. Khamenei at the funeral in Tehran, he got very, very emotional about it. He was crying, as was one of the other imams and the leadership there. And then you see these really kind of, I don't know how to describe it. It certainly looked like things were not in control to me. As they picked up these, the coffins and sort of, this happened everywhere. I don't think the guys, I don't know if they have him strapped in there or not, what's left of him. It probably could have fit in something, a box like this. But everywhere you go, in these mosques, and there's Soleimani's coffin, and this happened. Now, very interesting things that people and intelligence services would look at is who all's at the funeral. And one of the things they noted was this guy, who is the head of Hamas. And for whatever reason, the intelligence people that look at this, they say, that's very significant that he's in the third row. This is a big Iranian-backed group in Gaza, and this guy doesn't live in Gaza. He lives, I don't know if he's down in Qatar or Iran. But that's the head of Hamas, and he's at the funeral in Tehran. And so you have these, here's Soleimani's daughter. She got up at the funeral, and she gave a eulogy. This also happened in Tehran. American Zionists should know that my father's martyrdom has led to a greater awakening of the people's consciousness on the resistance front, and will bring about dark days for them and flatten their spider webs. And there were these crazy Trump, arrogant and a plaything, this is translated, of course, a plaything of Zionism. Don't think that everything is over with my father's martyrdom. Now, I don't know that I think that a lot of these people were sort of united behind this, but it's pretty clear that Iran is a totalitarian country, and if they need a big crowd, they get people out and they pay them, and I've even heard reports of people that did not go out that were shot and killed in their homes. And I have no doubt that that was true. On Turkish television last Sunday, there was an interview with President Erdogan, and he was asked questions about this. And here's just a little article. Yet while Erdogan's words showed sympathy for the commander, Turkey's pro-government media has been demonizing Soleimani. Because why? This is very important. What happens in Daniel chapter 8? There is a conflict between Turkey and Iran. And it talks about Persia in Daniel chapter 8 reaching out to the east and west, east and south. I'm sorry, the west and south and east. And this is exactly what Iran has done. They're messing around in Afghanistan, they're messing around in Syria, Iraq, south, east, west. Well, I should have done that backwards. So maybe it made sense to you. Maybe I'm the only one that's confused. But so Erdogan so this is very important that the Turkish press is demonizing Soleimani, portraying him as a murderer of Sunni Arabs and a former collaborator of the United States. Why? Because we helped in the fight against ISIS. Erdogan said Soleimani had no intention of being a caliph and had proven himself as a commander. While Iranian reports said Erdogan had referred to Soleimani as a martyr, Turkey said this was not the case. And Erdogan, who spoke with U.S. President Donald Trump hours before Soleimani was killed, made clear that he was not made aware of the U.S. plan, saying that the Iranian commander's death came as a shock. Although Turkey did not send any officials to the funeral, Erdogan said he advised caution to both Iraq and Iran. He also added that he believed Iran would respond to the killing. So after they have the Tehran funeral, they take, eventually, they take the body to Qom, the holy city of Shia Islam in Iran, and then they take him to his hometown in Kerman in eastern Iran, and they bury him there. And the scenes, I mean, you can see the scenes here of this people the crush of people, which resulted in a stampede because they don't manage the crowds very well. They had the coffins on these trucks that were driving through these crowds. That's a truck there. Those are trucks with the coffins on them. And there was a stampede and 56 people got killed. In fact, when you add up the toll of deaths this week from the death of Soleimani and the Iranian response, sending missiles into Iraq, talk about that in just a minute, the death toll is, in Iran, at least 56 people died in the stampede at Soleimani's funeral in his hometown. Iran also shot down a Ukrainian airliner taking off from Tehran International Airport, and 167 or 169 people killed. So the death toll was 56 plus 167 or 69 in Iran, and the death toll in Iraq was, well, if you count Soleimani and the guys we took out, that was 10. But Americans and Iraqis killed was 0 in the response. So more people died in Iran than died in Iraq or the US. And so you had these huge crowds. And then this was the picture of at the mosque in his hometown in eastern Iran where they buried him. And the crush of people was so bad and the stampede happened, they had to postpone his burial for a day. And so there are a lot of people really emotional about this and that type of thing. Other people are there for this. And so then there was the analysis that comes, and I won't go into that. The sinister genius of Soleimani from yesterday's Wall Street Journal, The Week, the death of a general, Iran swears vengeance, editorials in the Wall Street Journal, the bloody legacy of Qasem Soleimani. Kimberly Strassel has a very good article. It seems like a lot of the columnists that I respect, Heather McDonald, Melanie Phillips, Caroline Glick, Kimberly Strassel, they're these really bright women. And Kimberly Strassel is someone I would recommend that you read all the time. And she sort of looked at the response of the Democrats in the United States and said, there's no peace from the Doves. Her article says this: the primary contest to date has served mainly to highlight how far left Democrats have verged on domestic policy in the few years since Barack Obama. The Iran conflict has now exposed a similarly dramatic shift in foreign policy where progressive these days lead, even the moderate Joe Biden follows. The targeted killing of General Soleimani led the progressive movement to go full flower child. Thanks to desultory debate moderators, Americans until now had little idea how Democratic aspirants would specifically respond to terrorism or other provocations. The Soleimani moment proved clarifying. Voters now know that a President Bernie Sanders would not take action against Iran or other rogue regimes, no matter how many red lines they cross. Mr. Sanders will take no step that might bring us anywhere close to another disastrous war, cost more dollars and more deaths. A President Elizabeth Warren would similarly offer a pass to leaders of U.S. designated terrorist groups, at least if they have an official title. The Trump strike, she said, amounted to the assassination of a government official, a high-ranking military official. The House Progressive Caucus, in a Thursday press conference, laid out, this would be the squad, laid out additional aspects of the left's foreign policy worldview. Member after member took to the podium to demand legislation that would hem all presidents in from other acts of deterrence. Representative Ilhan Omar, a great military religious expert, explained that progressives don't oppose only military force. They also oppose crippling sanctions which starve the innocent people of Iran. Strassel notes, Mr. Obama's foreign policy was feckless, but it wasn't this. Progressives are blanking out the Obama history of sanctions and his aggressive use of clandestine drone attacks, more than 500, in places ranging from Iraq to Pakistan to Syria. In 2012, Mr. Obama blunted Mitt Romney's attempts to paint him as a typical Democratic naif by bragging about the drones, the overthrow of Libya's Gaddafi, and the U.S. attacks on al-Qaeda leadership. In fact, here is a several-minute clip from the Washington Examiner that looks at Democratic responses to the death of bin Laden and then their responses to the death of Soleimani. This is shocking.
Hail to the chief.
This is
Congratulations to President Obama for his leadership, for his determination, for his commitment of resources, for his making a priority the capture, the apprehension of Osama bin Laden.
The killing of bin Laden is a turning point in the war of terror. It's like a Saratoga or a Gettysburg. It sends a message. We are here. I'm giving a speech this morning on how New York can grow, and he's dead somewhere in the ocean.
Osama bin Laden is dead. Happy days. Happy days, everybody. This is the greatest. Give me a white channel, the general. This is the greatest night of my career. The bum is dead. The savage who hurt us so grievously. And I am so blessed, I'm so privileged to be at this desk at this moment.
After nearly 10 years of waiting, 10 years of imagining where he was, what his life was like, wondering if he would strike again, it is a relief to know he's gone.
Look at President Obama. Look at that look on his face. This is the day they got bin Laden. This is the Situation Room. And that is probably as much as any of us need to know about what exactly the President of the United States was thinking while it happened.
We can now proudly say what you've heard me say the last 6 months. Osama bin Laden is dead and General Motors is alive.
You know, when some people die, you don't know what the impact's going to be. When Princess Diana died, for example, there was a huge emotional outpouring. Elvis Presley in our culture. It turns out that this general we killed was a beloved hero.
This guy is regarded in Iran as a completely heroic figure, personally very brave.
I was wondering, when Aura was talking, I was trying to think of somebody, I was thinking of de Gaulle.
Don't for a minute start cheering this on. What you have done, what we have done, we have unleashed.
I will cheer it on.
We have, all right, well, you like Lindsey Graham, have never met a war you didn't like.
That is not true, and don't even say that.
This action may well have brought our nation closer to another endless war.
I do not believe, in terms of what is in the public domain, that they have made the country safer. The argument would be made that, putting the shoe on the other foot, if the United States had a high level, maybe the second most important person in the country, assassinated wherever, the United States might consider that an assault on our country. But it was an assault on Iran.
The president who says he wants to end endless wars in the Middle East is bringing us dangerously close to starting a brand new one.
Okay. Way to go, Geraldo. It's right up there with opening Al Capone's vaults. What a joke. There's certain things in your life, it's like, you want some guy, he makes millions of dollars. Why? That's so unfair. There's no justice. Susan Rice, in an editorial in the New York Times, wrote about the fallout of killing Soleimani. And she talked about, can we avoid a worst case scenario? It is hard to be optimistic. Now, what some enterprising person did was, they actually went back into the JCPOA that was enacted in 2015. And as part of that JCPOA, there were a number of people who had sanctions, organizations, entities, dozens and dozens of them, as a result of the actions of Iran. Under the JCPOA, they were removed from the list. And in essence, they were given a form of amnesty by the Barack Obama administration, of which Susan Rice was a critical part in national security apparatus. One of the people who was removed from the sanctions list under Barack Obama and John Kerry and all those people, the precursors to the squad, if you want, you see it right there in yellow. Qasem Soleimani. What a joke. This is what Qasem Soleimani was about. Here is a video that was released by people who are talking about the fact that what they want to, the followers of Soleimani want. And this was released this week. You will see what their main goal is. To honor their leader, this is what they thought would be important to show what they really want to accomplish. Wait for it. Wait for it. Now do you understand what they want? And here they will say what they want. You started it, we will end it. So elite military unit is still a potent force. They have a leadership to replace. I don't think you're going to see a lot of things change. But you did see a change from the response of the United States. We don't removing this guy from, he's off the sanctions list now, by the way, too, permanently. But he's also off every other list, like the list of the living. And so these are the people that are taking over the Al-Quds force. Iran then said, we're going to respond. We're going to respond. And so what they did was they launched some missiles into Iraq. They attacked a couple of American bases, one in Kirkuk, one in not too far outside of Baghdad. And you see the reports about that. The other person, by the way, who was killed in the strike, important person, was the head of the Hezbollah, Kataib Hezbollah unit militia in Iraq. He was with Soleimani, and he was a confidant of Soleimani. Mohandas was one of the key players behind Iraq's offensive against the Kurdish Peshmerga in October 2017, after the autonomous Kurdistan region held an independence referendum. Do you remember that? The Kurds voted to make themselves an independent state. The Iraqi Kurds said, we want an independent state. We want to secede from Iraq. They were attacked, led by groups, and it was pretty bad, by Mohandas. He lowered the Kurdish flag in Kirkuk. I am proud of my relations with Nasrallah, the head of Lebanon's Hezbollah militia. He said in January 2017, they go back a long time. He is the leader of the resistance, an important figure in the region. We follow his example and the example set by our brothers in Hezbollah. And here's a meeting where Mohandas is meeting with Soleimani. So I want to make a note too. By the way, in the Jerusalem Post in the paper the other day, a Palestinian team was convicted of murdering Ari Fold. You see down here in this picture, this is Gush Katif Junction in Israel in September of 2018, Ari Fold. You see this Palestinian youth, he stabs Ari, and now you see Ari running. There's the teen on the left. You see Ari coming up. He'll stagger, and he'll take the guy out, and then he collapses and he dies because the guy punctured his aorta. But he climbed a wall. He ran 60 meters. The guy was a superhero, and his killer was convicted of murder this week. So praise the Lord for that. I remember that day when it was a Sunday morning on the way to church. Avi Abelo, Facebook popped up with a video of him just sobbing at the Western Wall at the Kotel, talking about his dear friend Ari Fold, Ari was a bigger than life guy. So the other thing that happened this week was the INSS, the Institute for National Security Studies, based in Herzliya, Israel, presented a report to the president of Israel, President Rivlin, and the report sort of is a summary of where they think things are going, how they think things are going, what is Israel facing in the near term on a security level. Now, one of the things that they don't think that The forces in Syria are necessarily going to attack Israel right now. I'm sort of that view myself, but there are many, many things going on in the region so that we don't know what triggers these wars. I mean, I used the example last week of World War I. It really, I think on first blush, the assassination in Sarajevo, later in part of Yugoslavia, of the Archduke Ferdinand of the Crown Prince of the Austria-Hungarian Empire, that's going to lead to war, World War I. But these things happen. So this report was delivered to Rivlin this week. It's called the Strategic Survey for Israel 2019-2020 and the Threat Index 2020, delivered to the President of Israel. One of the things that they talk about there is the increased probability of war. The focus of the strategic assessment for 2020 is the tension between Israel's clear strength and impressive successes in a variety of fields, and the possibility that this positive situation will prove temporary and fragile. This tension derives from a number of factors that could lead to widespread clashes and even war in the coming year, and involves Israel's approach to significant national security challenges led by these factors. Iran's growing determination and audacity, both in its nuclear activities and its efforts to entrench itself in Syria. Let me just add that there's not a lot of Iranian Revolutionary Guard necessarily in Syria, but their proxies that they pay for, command and control, between Hezbollah and these others, that total force number is now somewhere in the neighborhood of 200,000 soldiers, troops, militia members. So Soleimani had done a lot of work to bring this about. So we have that. The efforts of Hezbollah to obtain large-scale offensive precision capability. And this has been a big concern as we watch the attack on the Saudi Arabian oil facility, and we also watch the attack on the Iranian attack on bases in Iraq in response to the killing of Soleimani. The one thing is clear is that Iran has developed very precise missiles. Now, no one was killed. That was probably because we had advance notice and we were able to get our people into safe places. But they took out the main command center at the one base, at the bases. And so they were very precise attacks, just like the attacks in Saudi Arabia back in September. And the efforts by Hamas to relieve the pressure in Gaza influenced the terms of an arrangement with Israel. All these events, the reports, the INSS report says, all these events are unfolding against the backdrop of the ongoing political crisis in Israel, which makes it harder to develop an updated strategy and the strategic competition between the powers, leading to basic problems and functional difficulties in the international system. In other words, things are developing and they're very fragile. As this article in the Jerusalem and Post and some of the other articles noted, even if the war between the wars, so we know that Israel is in a situation of, when they use that term, it's indicative of one thing. They've had wars in the past, and we're going to have wars in the future. They know this is going to happen. The Bible tells us it's going to happen, and the people in charge in Israel know that it's going to happen. And so they call this time right now the war between the wars. So even if the war between the wars strategy of intercepting and destroying precision missiles shipped from Iran to Hezbollah before they arrive in Beirut has worked until now, it could quickly become outdated, the report said. According to the INSS, Israel may not be able to continue striking enough weapons transfers over an extended period, especially if Iraq is included in the mix. Following the U.S. escalation with Iran and the Iraqi Shiites and a possible expulsion of American forces from Iraq, Israel's freedom of action in Iraq may become more circumscribed. And this is a big concern with the Israeli leadership. The head of the IDF, Hachavi, recently said, the development of these precision-guided missiles, mortars, ballistic missiles, and now, and really what they used in Iraq were cruise-type missiles. And they've been able to develop these things. They fly very low to the ground. And so things like Iron Dome, that, and Patriot missile batteries and that type of thing are not really effective. They were developed when you used to shoot a missile, the missile would take off, it would fly on a certain trajectory. You could figure out the calculated trajectory and take it out somewhere along the way. Cruise missiles fly low to the ground. They're hard to pick up, and they're able to zigzag on their way to the target. So you really can't take them out unless you know what target they're going after. So this is a problem, and I will tell you, Israel is very concerned about this. Here's some graphics. This is from the Guardian, or the Daily Mail, the Times of London, about how the missile strikes by Iran on the Iraqi bases. And there's no question they came from Iran. And there's some statistics here on the right about Iran's military strength: Army 350,000, Navy 18,000, Air Force 30,000, Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is separate, 125,000. So they have good military capabilities. Here is a sort of a high-resolution satellite graphic showing the buildings that they struck at the base near Baghdad. They were precise. So Seth Frantzman in the January 12th Jerusalem Post, I guess that's this morning, wrote this: Iran decided to use ballistic missiles to target U.S. bases in Iraq in the wake of the U.S. killing Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps chief Qasem Soleimani. The ballistic missiles mostly were aimed at Ain al-Assad base. And the interesting thing is, this base, and this is highly symbolic, is the base where President Trump spoke in December of 2018. And Seth Frantzman in his article notes, this was symbolic. Jonathan Spire also writes and talks about the attacks and said the attacks accomplished what they want. They didn't get a big retaliation from the United States. There are reports that the United States and Iran communicated through Swiss emissaries, telling each other to, okay, go ahead, take your shots, retaliate, but don't escalate. So right now there hasn't been an escalation, although the people in the Al-Quds Force and elsewhere in the Iranian Revolutionary Guard are saying they're going to escalate. There's more that's coming. And it's not just going to be in Iraq. It's going to be elsewhere on U.S. interest around the world. I don't know, but Jonathan Spire's article is very good. And he said, Iran had and has both assets and an ample target bank in the local area, meaning Iraq, for the carrying out of such an attack. In terms of assets, largely thanks to the career of late General Soleimani, around 200,000 militia personnel are available to the supreme leader in the land space between the Iraq-Iran border and the Mediterranean Sea, containing the nominal states, and I like Jonathan Spire's right, containing the nominal states of Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. In other words, we call them Iraq, we call them Syria, we call them Iran or Lebanon, but they're really not. They're not really states anymore. They're sort of fictional things that we pretend like we exist. Spire notes this in his article: Iranian propaganda makes much of the notion that the Iranian project is slow and systematic and at a level of sophistication that makes it invulnerable to the attacks of its enemies. That remains to be seen, he says. But the latest round of hostilities indicates that those who helm the Iranian bid for regional hegemony are aware of their drastic limitations in the military arena, are not suicidal, and are capable of formulating and implementing policy in line with the prevailing power realities. In other words, they're smart people, and they know what they're doing, but they're going to make trouble. So to give you an idea, so Trump is going to focus on sanctions, I think. This is kind of an example to show you what's happened under the Trump administration. These are Iranian oil exports on a daily basis. You can see that they top out 2.5, really sometimes at 3 million barrels a day. Look at what they're doing now. This has a huge impact on the Iranian economy. One of the best articles I think that I saw in response to what's going on in analysis was Caroline Glick's article in Israel Hayom. You can find it. The Israel Hayom publishes an English website. They only publish the newspaper and magazine that they have. This was in Friday's magazine. She says this: for the past 40-odd years, two narratives have guided American Middle East policy. Both were invented by the Carter administration. One relates to Iran, one relates to Israel. By killing Soleimani, Trump made clear that the blank check for aggression the previous 6 presidents gave Tehran is now canceled. From now on, the regime will be held responsible for its actions. From now on, U.S. policy towards Iran will be based on reality and not on escapism. Both narratives reject reality, developed by the Carter administration, on the basis for foreign policy decision-making in favor of delusion. Over the past 2 months, President Trump has rejected and disavowed them both as opponents are apoplectic. The second false narrative, and so they talked about what they did with regard to Iran was, oh, look at the students took over the embassy. And as long as they were students, it sort of gave the Carter administration cover for, well, we really don't need to do anything about it because they're just students, you know. They did this between classes and that, so how bad are they? The Iranian Revolution was a big deal. By the way, I forgot to mention it when I was showing you the pictures of, I mean, sort of the, you know, the way they were moving that coffin around of Soleimani during those marches. You can look it up online. I decided not to play them. They had similar emotional outpouring at the funeral of Ayatollah Khomeini in 1989. And essentially what happened was the crowd got so emotional that, and I don't remember if he was in a coffin or they were carrying the body, but it was a mess, let's just put it this way. They ripped at the coffin, they ripped the shroud off, and the body was falling around, and it was a major embarrassment for the Iranians. So they sort of kept it under control now. They just lost, you know, almost 6 people in a stampede. So the second false narrative Caroline Glick notes is that it's formed the basis of U.S. Middle East policy since Carter is that Israel and the so-called occupation are responsible for the absence of peace in the Middle East. And this is a fake narrative. The first Bush administration, the Clinton administration, the second Bush administration, and of course the Obama administration all held to the Carter line that blamed Israel and its control over Judea and Samaria and Jerusalem and the Golan Heights, and until 2005 Gaza, for the unrest and instability of the region. And this is what the Iranians say. They relied on that. Remember I talked a couple weeks ago about the Hansel Memorandum that said the settlements are illegal. Well, that day is over. Wednesday, Caroline notes, while the world was awaiting Trump's response to Iran's failed missile attack against Iraqi bases housing U.S. forces, the Coalition Policy Forum had a meeting in Jerusalem and on the legal and diplomatic significance of Pompeo's announcement about what they were doing in Iran. In a pre-recorded message for the conference, Pompeo briefly explained why he decided to disavow the Hansel memo, and his explanation could be equally applied to the Trump administration's policy towards Iran. In Pompeo's words, he said, "It is important that we speak the truth when the facts lead us to it, and that's what we've done. For the American foreign policy establishment, Trump's refusal to continue their 40-year marriage of policy to delusion," I love the way she writes, "is an unforgivable transgression and a threat. Not only has he committed the crime of rejecting their collective wisdom, his reality-based policies might actually be working. The threat to them is obvious. If Trump's reality-based policies succeed, he will dismantle their foreign policy legacy. All of their protestations of wisdom, all their fancy resumes and titles as former senior officials will lose their allure and market value. Pray that that is the case." Since Pompeo's statement regarding the Israeli communities in Judea and Samaria related to an issue which, while critical, is less in the headlines today than it was under Obama, aside from a few peremptory condemnations, the foreign policy aristocrats ignored it, as they saw it once they returned to power and start working with an Israeli government led by someone other than Benjamin Netanyahu. the anti-Israel phony narrative will be restored to its rightful place as the foundation of U.S. policy. The Iran story is different. Trump's policies expose the mendacity and rank insanity of his predecessors' policies towards Iran and Israel. Since Obama's policies were particularly radical, divorced from reality, and devastating, Trump has reasonably singled them out for particular rebuke and condemnation. Among other things, reasonably, Trump said the missiles Iran shot at the U.S. forces in Iraq were paid for by the $150 million in sanctions relief and $1.8 billion in cash that flowed to the coffers of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps through the 2015 nuclear agreement, the JCPOA. So this is a great article. She concludes with this. To protect and preserve their 40-year-old delusion-based policy, Trump's domestic opponents are effectively supporting the Iranian regime against the United States. And as they see it, they have no choice. They are in a race against time. The more successful Trump's reality-based policies towards Iran on the one hand and Israel on the other are, the harder it will be for the foreign policy establishment to restore their delusion-based policies when he leaves power. Given the stakes, we can assume that their attempts to clip Trump's wings and debase him will increase in intensity, churlishness, and irrationality as time goes by and as his successes mount. Agree with everything she said. Melanie Phillips, in writing on her blog, she also said something very much similar. The murderous, fanatical Iranian regime poses one of the greatest dangers to the civilized world. How shameful that Western liberals, in their terrifying moral and intellectual blindness, seem to be falling all over themselves to give it victory. She's correct. Now, the other thing that happened was that a jet taking off from Tehran airport was a Ukrainian jet, was shot down. 167, it was a 737-800, fairly new plane, by the way. You can see the flight path that it took. I have a little video of the what happened. And today they came out, they said, oh, you know, it was an explosion, it was a bad engine. They even had articles on the front page of the Iranian newspaper saying, boy, Boeing gets it again. Boy, Boeing screwed up again. And then today, this morning, they announced all over the place, people were falling over themselves, well, we shot it down by mistake. Here's a video of sort of what happened. You can kind of see the surface-to-air missile rising there. You'll see it hit the plane. And then what happens is you'll see the plane sort of coming down, and it hits and it explodes. Here's some closed circuit security camera footage of what happened. And then, of course, and nothing like this happened. So what happened was, American forces have confirmed that there was a radar lock on the plane. You'll see that. This is a graphic, I think, from CBS News. But the Iranian security, Air Force, whatever, Aerospace Force, locked on the plane, and here come the two SAMs, surface-to-air missiles. They hit the plane, and then the plane makes a big turn, makes a turn, still together, and it comes down and it crashes, and 167 people are killed. So this morning, there were all these people that were coming out and saying that they were...
I was in the west of the country following the completion of missile strikes against the US bases. I heard the heart-wrenching news of the Ukrainian Airlines flight crash. When I confirmed what had happened, I really wished I could die myself.
The short-range missile operator failed to get through to his superior officer and had 10 seconds to make his decision.
Unfortunately, because of a hasty decision of one person, this great disaster happened.
Now, that was the head of the Iranian Aerospace Division of their armed forces. Now, the result of that was interesting, was that, you might want to turn this down, because the Iranians, especially in universities across Iran, came out in protest once they admitted this. They're on the streets And the Iranian security guards came out, and they are like getting in the face of these security guards who, you remember, they killed hundreds of people in Iraq and Iran during protests over the past few weeks. So whatever the Iranian regime said, look at the outpouring of unity at the funeral of the great General Soleimani. Look at these people, and we're now united. One little mistake, and they're protesting it. In fact, this is kind of an interesting one on the right. This is at one of the universities in Iran, and you see the U.S. and Israeli flags there. Now, it's very common. It's sort of the ultimate insult to trample on a flag or to use expose the bottom of your foot. Remember somebody threw a shoe at President Bush? That was like an ultimate insult in that part of the world. And look at what most people are doing now. They're walking around it in public, and we have it on film. This is another one of these things which is kind of a big deal. President Trump treated in Farsi I think he probably had help composing it, but as opposed to what he usually does. But this is the translation. The Iranian government should allow human rights groups to monitor and report on the current reality of protests to the Iranian people. We should not see the peaceful killing of protesters again or the internet shut down. The world is watching. The economists, they evaluated, was this a masterstroke by Trump or is it madness? And the answer is we have to wait and see. But right now it's clear that the Iranians made a response. They did some things. They didn't injure any Americans or Iraqis. They did take out some buildings. Maybe they're standing down. Maybe they're not. Maybe there's more coming. We'll just have to wait and see. We know that, but they're not going away. So we know that this is going to be a continuing problem. And as noted in the Wall Street Journal, the Iraqi militias remain a big wild card. So that was sort of the Iran, U.S., Persia, all that stuff, Israel thing. I want to discuss maybe one or two other things very briefly. I know you say that. You say briefly, John, but it's never briefly. I'll do it the best. This is another big deal. There were a couple things that happened with regard to gas in the Eastern Mediterranean. First, Netanyahu went and signed an agreement with Greece and Cyprus about the pipeline that they want to build from the Eastern Med to Cyprus, to Crete, to Greece, to Italy, to Europe. Russia does not like this because Russia makes almost all of its revenue, aside from arms and arms sales, off of the sale of gas to Europe. That's their big customer. The U.S. has instituted sanctions against Nord Stream, and that project is slowed down a bit. Russia does not want, Russia and Ukraine are at odds. And all the gas lines that Russia has go across Ukraine. Ukraine earns about $2.5 or $3 billion a year in transit fees, but Russia wants to get around that. So they're putting in the Nord Stream, which goes up to the north and down through the Baltic Sea to Europe. And then they also, Turkey and Russia have entered into this agreement with regard to a thing that is called the Turk Stream pipeline. And so this week, there was a big thing with Putin and Erdogan, and they had a symbolic opening of the Turk Stream pipeline. Now, this thing has been under construction for a while, big celebration, and that allows gas to transit across the Black Sea. Well, actually, you can see a little bit of a map here as to how this thing goes. Across the Black Sea to Turkey on the European side of the Bosporus, and then it will go into Bulgaria, Serbia, Hungary, into southern and eastern Europe. And that's a big deal. That thing's been under construction for a number of years, and you can see the EU imports of natural gas in 2018. dependency on gas importers, Germany 50 to 75%, Italy 25 to 50%, Netherlands 25 to 50%. Geopolitical Futures also has a pretty good map about the the Turk Stream construction and a timeline, and shows how the gas is going to start flowing. The gas started flowing on January 1st. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to corner the market to prevent Israel from getting in there. This is a big deal to Russia, and it's a big deal to Turkey. But now the problem is that, this is a good graphic, when it comes to Libya, Putin and Erdogan are kind of at odds. Putin supports the rebel side. Erdogan supports the side recognized by the UN. Earlier this week, Erdogan gave a speech and said, look, our parliament has improved the sending of troops from Turkey to Libya. And part of that was because Erdogan wants to support his vision of what's going to happen in the East Med. This is an interview that he gave on CNN Turk news show last Sunday. And you see here the map. You see Libya and the Eastern Mediterranean. Israel's there to the right, the eastern edge of the Mediterranean. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to block. Erdogan says, I entered into an agreement with Libya, and we now control that whole region of the Mediterranean Sea, and your pipeline can't get in. This guy, look, he's even got a laser pointer, and so Erdogan and Netanyahu are using PowerPoint and graphics probably better than anybody, leaders on the planet right now, but they want to cut off the Israeli gas field from getting to Europe. Here's another graphic. This is from Southfront.org. By the way, I recommended it last week. You should know Southfront is very pro-Syrian in their orientation, but they have good graphics. So ignore the politics and just look at that. So Erdogan, this was an hour and a half interview that Erdogan gave. One of the other things that he talked about in that interview was the safe zone that he wants in Syria. And he talked about what successes or whatnot that they've had there. But the other interesting thing, he kind of shows like, well, we really need, it would be great if we controlled all the way down here into southern Syria. You'll sort of see the map sort of focus on that for just a brief moment, and his little laser pointer. We're here, but boy, it would be really great if we could get all the way down here to the Syrian oil fields down here by Dar al-Zor. I think this is where it comes in. You see Raqqa there, that was head of the Islamic State. Yeah, see, he really wants that area. And he can't stop talking about it. So the other thing they talked about too was this project that he's talked about for quite some time, which is Canal Istanbul. The Bosporus is a very heavily trafficked thing. There's been accidents there. I think I mentioned last week there was a ship hit one house along the Bosporus there. And the article I said it cost $100 million of damages. So it's probably not just your average, condo. It's these incredible mansions that were built back in the Ottoman days. And so here's where they want to build this new canal, about 25 miles long, costs about $15 billion. Now, the mayor of Istanbul, who's an opposition party to Erdogan, says, we're not going to do that, but this is a big project for Erdogan. The thing you should take away with this is there is no doubt that Turkey is a major player in the end times. Whether it's Turkey under Erdogan or somebody else, you need to understand this. The earlier Secretary of State, Foreign Minister of Turkey, I watched some speeches that he gave back in 2009, 2010, where he said, listen, we essentially, without saying it, he said it in a diplomatic way, we want Northern Africa. We want the Middle East. We want the Balkans. Because we want to reconstitute the Ottoman Empire. Now, he and Erdogan have had a falling out, but it's very interesting that all of this is coming to a head at the same time. Again, it's this convergence that we talked about. All these players are sort of rising to prominence. They're taking acts. The other thing that I'll just mention briefly, this is a survey of some of the polls in Israel about what's going to happen in the next election. And what you see when you look at this and you add up the numbers, you see a little bit drop back from Likud. They had 32. Blue and white there on the left had 33. They're projected to have 34. Likud 30. The Arab Joint List 15. Some of the Orthodox parties 8. And you see the Lieberman's party at 7. That's a little bit of a drop. And then you see Naftali Bennett's party, the New Right on the far right. That is, they're supposed to get 4. Now, one thing that Israel announced that's very significant. So I do not know how close it is to deployment, but Israel unveiled this week a breakthrough laser technology to shoot down missiles. With that, they also released a pretty good video about what, so remember, Iran has these precision-guided missiles. They have cruise missiles. Iron Dome won't really work with that. Patriot missile batteries won't work with that. And it's a big concern among the Israeli leadership. So here is a laser system that they, I think, are close to deploying. And it will show you what will happen. Thing is called, I don't think it's called R2D2, although it kind of looks like R2D2. And you see it can be implemented in a number of places, mounted on tanks. So, I don't know that it's completely ready to deploy yet, but it's certainly this would be a huge game changer. So, and they felt comfortable enough to announce it on top of these are like missiles that would be launched from Syria, Hezbollah, Iran, and this is a drone with the system. To take these out. So that sort of looks like a Russian S-300 system. And that one never got off the ground. So this would be a big game changer if this is totally implemented. But it's necessary because Israel faces a huge threat, and they're concerned about this. So they are, and look, they announced that this is what they're planning on doing. Maybe they've already got it. Who knows? Sometimes they and what they have may be better than what this shows. We have weapons like that as well. So that's kind of interesting. So you see this convergence of all this happening, and I'm going to quit. I have another thing on archaeology in Jerusalem, but we will hold that for a future date. So anyway, so thanks so much for listening. And again, you see that the convergence of all these things are escalating. Things are speeding up, I think. So get ready to meet the Lord. I guess that's the thing that I want to say. Father, thanks so much for your word. We pray that you will help us always live our lives in the light of your return and our meeting the Lord. But we pray for those around us that we will be able to have time to share the glorious hope of the gospel of Jesus Christ with them in this time period before that great time of trouble comes on the world. Give us those opportunities. Bless us this week. In Jesus' name, amen.